The night it began, the sky over Crescent City burned in a restless mix of violet clouds and thin red streaks, as though the heavens themselves sensed something was shifting. Inside the narrow apartment complex on Melrose Lane, 22-year-old Arya Lane hurried up the dimly lit stairs, her breath a little uneven from the long shift at the cafe. Her dark, glossy hair clung to her cheeks, damp from the light drizzle outside, and her golden brown eyes carried a quiet sharpness that rarely softened. She had always moved through the world with the wary alertness of someone who had learned early to expect the worst, someone who was used to shadows following her. She lived alone on the 7th floor, a corridor known to be too silent for comfort, too empty even during the day. But tonight, something felt painfully different. As she reached the landing, she froze. At the far end of the hallway where the flickering bulb struggled to stay alive, someone was standing. Tall and moving, dressed in black, she blinked, unsure if the dimness was distorting the shape, but no, the figure was undeniably real. And watching her, Arya's pulse tightened, a slow drumbeat rising behind her ribs. Her first instinct was to pretend she hadn't seen him, but her body wouldn't move, trapped between curiosity and the instinctive fear she always tried to hide. The hallway was long, narrow, and painfully quiet, amplifying every small sound, the hum of old pipes, the distant rumble of traffic, and her own uneven breathing. As her eyes adjusted, she noticed more details. The stranger's hair was slightly tousled, as if wine had run through it minutes ago. His shoulders wide beneath a dark coat that brushed the floor, and his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that felt both unsettling and strangely familiar. Arya swallowed hard. Who is that? There were only 8 tenants on this floor, all elderly. None looked anything like him. She took one cautious step back, fingers slipping into her bag to grab her phone, but the small movement seemed to stir the air. The stranger tilted his head, and in one fluid step, too smooth, too quiet, he turned away and disappeared into the faint shadow behind the fire exit door. Arya's breath escaped her in a sharp whisper. She hadn't imagined it. Someone had been waiting at the end of the hallway. Someone who left without a sound. By the time she reached her apartment door, her hands trembled faintly, not from fear, she insisted to herself, but from confusion. She had lived here for 2 years and never once encountered anyone like that. No new neighbors, no visitors, nothing. And something deeper gnawed at her, a familiarity she didn't want to acknowledge, as if she had seen him somewhere long ago, in a memory still buried under layers of dread. She forced herself to dismiss the thought. After locking the 3 bolts on her door, she pressed her forehead against the wood and exhaled slowly. "It's nothing," she whispered, "just a stranger." But even as she said it, the words tasted wrong. She tossed her bag on the couch and tried to shake off the unease. The apartment was small but warm. Old sofa, messily stacked books, a plant she kept forgetting to water. It should have felt safe. Instead, her skin prickled with the distinct sensation of being watched. She turned toward the window, but the curtains were closed. She checked the peephole-empty hallway. Still, her heart wouldn't settle. That familiar, suffocating instinct crept back. Something is coming. Arya moved into the kitchen, filling a glass with water to steady herself, when a soft, metallic sound cut through the silence, a sound that didn't belong. A click, light, precise. Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly toward the hallway where the front door stood. She stared at it for several seconds, waiting. Nothing. No movement. No shadow beneath the door. But she knew what she heard. It was the unmistakable sound of someone lightly tapping the metal of her doorknob. From the outside, the glass nearly slipped from her hand. She stepped back, breath shallow. She wasn't paranoid. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there. Someone who had followed her. Someone who knew which door was hers. She forced her trembling voice low. "Who's there?" Silence. No footsteps. No retreating sound. It was as if whoever made the noise wanted her to know but not to see. Her heartbeat hammered against her ribs as she reached for her phone, hesitating only a moment before checking the hallway again through the peephole. Nothing. The corridor was empty, the faint buzzing light flickering as it always did, except this time. she noticed something she hadn't seen earlier. A single folded piece of black paper lay on the floor directly in front of her door. Slowly, cautiously, she unlatched the chain but didn't open the door fully just enough to retrieve the paper. She unfolded it with stiff fingers. Inside was only one sentence, written in sharp, precise handwriting. "You are not as alone as you think." Arya felt the ground tilt beneath her. The air grew too heavy to breathe. The stranger hadn't only been standing in the hallway. He had been waiting for her, following her, leaving messages. The paper slipped from her fingers as the truth coiled tightly around her chest. This was not random. This was not coincidence. Someone knew her. Someone was watching her. And as the hallway light flickered one more time, going out for just a second too long, Arya looked up and saw a figure standing at the far end again, barely illuminated, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Before she could scream, the lights went out completely. For a few suffocating seconds, the hallway outside Arya's apartment dissolved into absolute darkness, thick, heavy, and unnervingly silent. She stood frozen, her pulse pounding so violently she felt it in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the door as every instinct screamed at her to retreat, but her legs refused to move. The electricity flickered back with a harsh buzz, flooding the corridor in dim light again. Arya's breath caught. The end of the hallway was empty completely. No figure, no shadow, nothing to prove he had ever been there. Only the black note still lying on the ground where she dropped it. Her hands shook as she retrieved it again, her eyes trailing over the haunting sentence. "You are not as alone as you think." A chill skated down her spine. But something else bothered her more. Those eyes she thought she saw glowing in the dark. Human eyes didn't look like that. They had held a strange luminescence, faint but unmistakable, like moonlight reflected in water. Arya gripped the paper tighter. This wasn't normal. This wasn't safe. But deep inside her chest, something old stirred, something she hadn't felt in years. A memory, a voice, a shadowed figure. Her stomach flipped. No, it can't be him. The very thought made her breath falter. Determined not to lose control, Arya slammed her door shut and locked every bolt. She forced herself to move through the apartment, checking windows, corners, even behind the shower curtain, as if that would help ease the tension crawling beneath her skin. When she finally collapsed onto the couch, she pressed her palms to her forehead. "Get it together," she whispered. She had survived worse. She had survived the night that changed everything 5 years ago, the night she tried so hard to forget. But tonight had awakened a sensation she had buried deeply, a sense of being followed, hunted, observed. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, but she flinched when her phone vibrated sharply beside her. She grabbed it with shaking fingers, and no number. Her chest tightened. For a moment she considered ignoring it, but her thumb moved on its own, answering the call. She pressed the phone to her ear, saying nothing. Silence greeted her, thick, waiting. She nearly hung up when a quiet breath echoed on the other end. Not words, not threats, just breathing, slow, controlled, listening to her. "If you're trying to scare me," Arya said, her voice low but steady, "it won't work." The breathing paused for 1 second. Then the line disconnected. Arya's heart felt like it dropped straight through her body. She stood abruptly, pacing the living room with restless steps. She needed answers. She needed to know whether the stranger was real or a phantom from her past resurfacing to torment her. Her apartment suddenly felt too small, too confining, like the walls were leaning inward. She grabbed her coat and swung her bag over her shoulder. She couldn't stay here. She had to go somewhere public, somewhere bright. The cafe where she worked stayed open until midnight. There would still be customers, noise, lights. She stepped out into the hallway again, checking both directions carefully. Empty. A shaky breath left her chest. She hurried toward the elevator, pressing the button repeatedly, though it didn't make it come any faster. When it finally dinged open, she stepped inside and hit the lobby button. The doors slid shut. But just before they did, her eyes caught something at the far end of the hallway, something that made her blood freeze. A hand, a pale hand curling around the edge of the fire exit door. slowly, silently, as if someone was pulling it open again to watch her leave. Her breath caught in her throat as the elevator doors sealed her inside. She pressed herself against the back wall, her lungs burning. He's still here. The elevator descended, but Arya's mind spiraled backward 5 years ago, to a memory she never spoke about. The memory of waking up in a hospital room, wrists bruised, consciousness foggy, and a doctor telling her she had been found unconscious in an abandoned building. No one ever learned who dragged her there. No one ever found the person responsible. And the only thing Arya remembered from that night flurry distorted was the silhouette of a man standing in the doorway, watching her with eyes that weren't fully human. Eyes like the stranger at the end of the hallway. She had convinced herself the memory was imagined, a trauma-induced hallucination, but now she wasn't so sure. When the elevator reached the ground floor, she stepped out quickly, scanning the lobby. Two neighbors chatted by the mailboxes. A security guard sat in the booth, scrolling through his phone. Normal, comforting. For the first time that night, she exhaled. She hurried toward the glass doors until a shadow moved across her reflection. She spun sharply, nothing behind her, nobody close enough to cast it. The lobby lights flickered once, then steadied. Her skin tingled with the same cold electricity she felt moments before the hallway lights died. Something supernatural pulsed at the edges of reality again. Arya pushed through the glass doors into the night air, gulping in the cool oxygen as if it would wash away her fear. The city streets were alive, cars rushing past, neon signs buzzing, music spilling out of nearby shops. She forced herself toward the cafe, her footsteps fast, almost frantic. But halfway down the street, she stopped. The hair on the back of her neck lifted, she turned slowly. At the edge of the building, beneath a flickering streetlight, a figure stood half-hidden in the shadow. The same tall form, the same dark coat, watching her silently. His face was obscured, but his presence felt unmistakable, familiar, terrifying, drawn straight from the memory she feared most. Their eyes met across the street for a single charged heartbeat, and then he stepped forward. One step, two, his movements were slow, deliberate, as though he wasn't approaching her. But claiming her, Arya stumbled back, startled, unable to look away. And then he spoke for the first time, his voice low and haunting, cutting through the night like a blade. "Arya Lane," he said, as if he had always known her. It's been a long time. Arya's breath collapsed in her chest. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his face. But somehow he knew her, and before she could run, scream, or speak, he vanished from sight, dissolving into thin air like a ghost. The next morning, Arya woke to the insistent buzz of her alarm clock, her limbs heavy with exhaustion. Sleep had evaded her entirely, replaced by an unrelenting unease that seemed to have seeped into her very bones. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind: the stranger at the end of the hallway, the black note, his whispered voice on the street. Even now, sitting at her small kitchen table, she could feel the weight of his gaze, as if it had followed her into the light. She tried to convince herself that it was impossible, that perhaps it had all been a hallucination born from fatigue and anxiety. But when she glanced toward the hallway, the thought alone made her shiver. That long, narrow stretch of floorboards, silent and unbroken, still felt ominously alive. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. Hands trembling, she picked up. This time, it wasn't breathing, but a single message: "You can't hide, not from me." Arya's stomach twisted into knots. Fear sharpened into something else: urgency. She couldn't ignore this anymore. She had to know who was following her, why, and if the shadows of her past had finally caught up. Determined to take action, she retraced her steps from the previous night, returning to the apartment hallway with a resolve that felt stronger than her fear. Each step echoed loudly to loudly, and the flickering light overhead seemed to flicker in rhythm with her heart. The hallway was empty to empty. But she noticed subtle changes: the faintest scuff marks in the dusty corners, small scratches along the walls, signs of someone else's presence. She crouched and examined the floor closely, finding faint footprints too large to belong to anyone her height. Her pulse raced. The stranger hadn't just appeared, he had been there before, moving silently through the apartment, mapping it, waiting. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, yet another voice, the quiet, insistent part of her that had survived trauma, urged her to confront this. Arya reached for the black note from the night before, clutching it like a talisman. Someone wanted her attention. Someone was sending her messages. And she knew instinctively that this person was not an ordinary stalker. Later that afternoon, Arya went to the cafe where she worked, seeking refuge in the mundane buzz of life. But the ordinary comfort of the morning was shattered when a man appeared at the entrance, his posture casual yet deliberate, dark hair falling in sharp angles across a face partially shadowed. Her stomach lurched, her pulse spiking with a mix of fear and something else, recognition she couldn't quite place. He didn't speak, only observed, a faint, unsettling smirk on his lips. Arya froze, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to steady her breathing. Customers whispered as their eyes flicked toward her, sensing her tension. The man moved slowly, deliberately, closer to her, never taking his eyes off her. Then just as suddenly as he arrived, he turned and exited the cafe without a word, leaving behind only the echo of his steps and the suffocating sense that she had barely survived an encounter she couldn't explain. Questions burned inside her: who he was, what he wanted, and why the memory of his eyes felt like a scar in her mind. By evening, Arya returned to her apartment, determined to find answers. But what she discovered chilled her to the core. The black note had multiplied. 3 more identical pieces of paper lay scattered across her apartment floor, each containing a single, cryptic message. I see you. You belong to the shadows. Run, and I follow, panic clawed at her chest. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of unease. The shadows in every corner seemed to stretch and writhe, as if the walls themselves were conspiring against her. The thought of calling the police crossed her mind, but she hesitated. Who would believe her? A mysterious man who appeared and vanished, leaving notes that seemed impossibly deliberate. No one would take her seriously, and yet Arya's survival instincts flared. She couldn't remain passive. Something was driving him, and if she didn't act soon, she feared the consequences. For the first time since the stranger had appeared, she felt the raw, unfiltered terror of knowing she was being hunted by someone who might know her deepest secrets even she had tried to forget. As night fell again, Arya sat by her window, looking out over the neon-lit streets below, the city alive yet indifferent to her plight. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the sharp pang of isolation. And then, faint but unmistakable, she heard it, a soft, deliberate tap against the glass of her window. Her heart stopped. She turned slowly, expecting nothing. And there he was, standing outside, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, his posture calm yet predatory. The world seemed to narrow to him, the city's chaos fading away. He didn't speak, only watched, as if daring her to step outside. Arya's body trembled, torn between fear and something she couldn't name, something magnetic, unsettling, as if she had known him in another life. The lights inside her apartment flickered once more, plunging her into semi-darkness. She took a cautious step back, realizing with a sinking certainty that the stranger at the end of the hallway had begun to manipulate her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. And just as her trembling fingers reached for her phone to call for help, he disappeared, leaving only the faint whisper of his voice on the wind. You cannot run from me, Arya. Arya spent the following day in a haze of unease, unable to shake the stranger from her mind. Every shadow seemed to shift with intent. Every passerby's glance felt like scrutiny. By noon, she realized he couldn't wait for him to make the next move. She had to confront the reality of his presence to uncover at least a fragment of the truth. The city library, quiet and public, became her sanctuary. She scoured old newspapers and police reports, looking for patterns, anything that could hint at someone watching or stalking her. Hours passed with nothing, until her fingers froze over a yellowed article tucked between other files. A string of unsolved cases, each describing a young woman found disoriented, traumatized, or missing briefly, each with witnesses recalling a tall man, black coat, and eyes that glowed faintly. Her blood ran cold. It's him. That man had been following others before her. The stranger was not random. He was systematic. And the realization that she might be just the next in a long line of victims or something else entirely shook her to her core. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden presence at the library entrance. Arya's head jerked up, and there he was, the same figure from the hallway, standing in the doorway, partially hidden by the shadows cast by the overhead lights. He didn't move, just watched. The air between them seemed charged, humming with the unspoken energy of recognition, of connection, and of danger. Her pulse raced, and yet, amidst the fear, a strange familiarity rooted itself within her chest. She forced herself to stand, her chair scraping against the tile floor. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. His lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Someone who knows you better than you know yourself," he said quietly, taking a single step closer. Arya's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't yet form. He was dangerous, undeniably, yet she couldn't look away, and she couldn't move. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, caught between instinct and an unexplainable pull. Suddenly, he spoke again, his voice low and measured, almost hypnotic. "I wasn't always watching to harm you. I've been protecting you from those who are far more dangerous than I am." His words echoed in her mind, colliding with the fear and confusion swirling inside her. Arya struggled to reconcile the image of the haunting figure with the idea of protection. "Then why haunt me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt at authority. He tilted his head, his dark hair falling across sharp features. "Because you had to find me on your own. Because you need to understand the truth about who you are and who I am." His eyes, those faintly glowing eyes, bore into hers with such intensity that she felt her resolve waver. Pieces of memories she didn't know she had started surfacing, flashes of him appearing in corners of her life, silent, protective, observing when danger approached. The realization hit her like ice. He had been a presence for years, silently guarding her, yet never fully revealing himself. And now, after all this time, the past demanded answers. He stepped closer, each movement deliberate, and handed her a small, black leather-bound journal. "Everything you need to know is here," he said. Arya's fingers hovered over the journal, hesitant, as though touching it might trigger some unknown consequence. Finally, she opened it, and the pages were filled with careful observations, notes on her routines, even sketches of her surroundings, evidence of meticulous surveillance. But one section made her stomach drop, photographs of herself as a child, alongside a man whose features were shadowed but unmistakably familiar. The stranger's voice broke through her shock. "You've been targeted because of your bloodline, your connection to something far older than you. I've tried to keep you safe, even if it meant scaring you away from the truth." Arya's head swam with disbelief and terror. Questions collided with the memory fragment she tried to bury for years. Bloodline, connection, older than me. The stranger's words were both a revelation and a warning, a promise that the truths she had yet to uncover could either save her or destroy her. As the sun dipped below the city skyline, casting long shadows into the library, Arya struggled to process what she had learned. The stranger stood silently behind her, a silent sentinel in the dim light. Her pulse thrummed painfully, every nerve alive, every instinct screaming that nothing would ever be the same again. "I don't know if I can trust you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the buzzing of the overhead lights. He inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Then prove it," she said, clutching the journal. He didn't move, didn't respond, only nodded once. "Tomorrow, you'll begin to understand why your life has been anything but ordinary, and why you are never truly alone." The weight of his words pressed down on her chest, and a shiver ran through her body. Arya knew the next steps would be dangerous. She knew that uncovering the truth would push her into unknown territory. And yet, a spark of determination ignited within her, whatever the cost. She needed to know. Arya woke to a persistent drizzle tapping against her window, the city drenched in silver and gray as if mourning the calm she had never truly possessed. The black journal lay open on her desk, pages sprawled with cryptic notes and symbols that made her head spin. Sleep had been impossible after the revelations of the previous night. She had spent hours trying to decipher the stranger's words, trying to piece together the connection between her bloodline, the mysterious man, and the inexplicable presence that had followed her life for years. Every clue pointed towards something much larger than herself, a hidden web of influence, danger, and secrets buried beneath Crescent City's neon glow. And yet, she felt compelled to move forward, despite the knowing fear that each step deeper into the truth would come at a cost she couldn't yet measure. By late afternoon, Arya had decided to visit her apartment building to retrace her own movements and see if she could find any sign of the stranger's influence. Her heels clicked against the polished floor of the lobby, the sound echoing unnervingly. She reached the elevator and pressed the button for her floor, nerves coiled tight in her stomach. When the doors opened, she froze. Her apartment hallway was no longer silent. Shadows flickered at the edges, and a strange, metallic scent like old blood or rusted iron hung in the air. Slowly, deliberately, she walked down the corridor, each step measured, her gaze sweeping over every corner. And then she saw it, the fire exit door at the far end of the hallway slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out. She hesitated, a cold shiver running down her spine. He's here. Not in the abstract sense of the mysterious stalker she had chased through memories, but physically present, waiting. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet another part of her she didn't want to admit urged her to confront him. As she approached, the door swung open fully, revealing not the stranger she had come to know, but someone else entirely, someone she had considered a friend. Ethan Graves, a co-worker from the cafe, the one she had trusted implicitly over the past year, stood there with a smug, almost imperceptible smirk. Her heart lurched, disbelief and betrayal colliding inside her. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she asked, voice trembling but firm. His dark eyes glittered with amusement. "You've been a little too curious, Arya," he said, stepping closer, the light from the hallway casting sharp shadows across his face. "You were supposed to stay in the dark, but you had to open that journal, didn't you? You had to seek the truth." Arya's mind raced. Ethan, he's been here all along. Every comforting memory she had of him, the shared shifts at the cafe, the small jokes, the late-night talks suddenly twisted into deception. He had been the one manipulating her, guiding her into this web of danger, while she thought she was being haunted by some unknown figure. Anger and fear surged through Arya in equal measure. She refused to let herself be cornered. Not again. Her fingers gripped the edge of the journal, and she swung it with all her might, striking Ethan across the shoulder. He staggered back, eyes widening in surprise, but recovered quickly, smirking again as though her attack amused him more than it frightened him. "You're stronger than I thought," he admitted, circling her with predatory precision. "But strength isn't enough. You've underestimated me, Arya, just like everyone else." The realization hit her like ice. He had been orchestrating events from the very beginning. The stranger, perhaps a real ally all along, the only one trying to protect her from Ethan's reach. Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to focus. This was not a fight she could lose. She had to find the stranger before it was too late. Every second she delayed could cost her more than her pride. It could cost her life. Desperation fueled her next move. Arya darted past Ethan, her footsteps echoing sharply through the hallway, adrenaline sharpening her senses. He followed, a shadow pursuing her through the narrow, flickering lit corridor, his footsteps silent yet purposeful. The air seemed to thrum with tension, every heartbeat amplified, every movement critical. As she reached the stairwell, she glimpsed him, the stranger, emerging from the shadows above, stepping down with a fluid grace that seemed almost unreal. Relief and disbelief flooded her at once. He extended a hand, his eyes locking with hers, an unspoken promise of protection. Ethan halted for a split second, a flash of hesitation that told her everything she needed to know. This was no longer a simple confrontation. The forces at play were far beyond what she had imagined, and the stranger, her enigmatic protector, was the only hope she had of navigating the labyrinth of lies and betrayal Ethan had created. But as he prepared to move toward her, Ethan's smirk deepened and the narrow hallway seemed to contract. "You can't escape me, Arya," he hissed. Not yet. The tension exploded like a live wire crackling between them, each second stretching into eternity. Outside the apartment, the city lights flickered against the night sky, indifferent to the struggle unfolding within the walls. Arya's mind raced, trying to reconcile the pieces: the stranger who had haunted and protected her, the betrayal by someone she trusted, the cryptic journal, and the shadows of her past that now loomed closer than ever. She had survived dangers before, but this was different. This was intimate, personal, and it demanded everything she had: every ounce of courage, wit, and instinct. The stranger moved closer, hand outstretched, offering both protection and the promise of answers she desperately needed. But as Ethan lunged forward, the hall was suddenly plunged into darkness, the lights failing completely. In that instant, Arya realized the danger was far from over. Someone or something was always watching, always waiting, and the truth she sought might come at a price she wasn't yet ready to pay. The darkness lingered longer than it should have, the faint hum of the broken hallway lights stretching into an unbearable silence. Arya's heart pounded in her chest, every nerve screaming for her to flee, yet she stayed rooted in place. The stranger's hand remained outstretched, a silent anchor in the chaos surrounding her. When the lights flickered back on, the hallway was transformed. Ethan was gone, but the tension remained, thick and almost tangible, like smoke curling through the air. Arya clutched the black leather journal to her chest, scanning the pages frantically. Hidden within the delicate handwriting were layers she hadn't noticed before: encrypted symbols, initials, and coded messages that hinted at something much bigger than she had imagined. The stranger's gaze followed her closely, patient, almost expectant, as if he had anticipated this exact moment. "You need to understand more than just him," he said quietly, his voice low but steady. "There's a truth you've avoided your entire life. One that will explain why you've been hunted, why you've been protected, and why you cannot run from what you are." Arya swallowed hard. She had suspected this was bigger than Ethan's betrayal, but hearing it aloud, from someone who seemed to know everything, made her stomach twist. He gestured for her to follow, and she did, despite the fear knotting her stomach. They moved silently through the city streets, each step deliberate, their presence almost invisible amidst the neon haze and the drizzle-soaked roads. The stranger led her to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Crescent City, its exterior jagged and foreboding, a place most would avoid after dark. Inside, the space was vast, empty except for a single, dim light hanging from the ceiling. The air smelled faintly metallic, and shadows seemed to cling to every corner. "Look here," he said, pointing to a series of photographs pinned to the wall. Arya's eyes widened. There were images of her childhood, snapshots, school events, and candid shots she didn't remember being taken. And there, always looking nearby, was a shadowed figure. She froze. "Ethan?" The stranger shook his head. "No, someone else has been connected to you far longer than him. Someone whose intentions aren't yet clear." Her pulse quickened. The web of danger, protection, and secrets stretched further than she could comprehend. Her life, she realized, had been a chessboard, and she was only now beginning to see the pieces. The stranger moved closer, lowering his voice. "Your family's history is not ordinary. You are the last descendant of a lineage tied to powers that exist outside the known world. That bloodline, your bloodline, is why you've been watched, why you've been targeted, and why I've been forced to intervene." Arya's head spun, her thoughts racing in chaotic spirals. Powers, lineage, what did any of that mean? She felt both disbelief and a strange pull and intuitive acknowledgement that what he said might be true. "I know this is a lot," he continued, "and I know you want answers now. But you must trust me. Ethan is dangerous, yes, but he is only part of a much larger game. Others are watching to some for protection, some for destruction. And you, Arya, are at the center of it all. The weight of his words settled like stones in her chest. She had always suspected she was different, always felt out of place, and now, for the first time, the reasons made sense. But understanding was terrifying. If her bloodline was truly powerful, what did that mean for her future? What did it mean for the stranger who had become her protector? And most importantly, could she trust him? Arya's gaze fell back on the pinned photographs. Among them, a faint, recurring symbol caught her attention, a spiral mark etched into the background of several images. The stranger noticed her focus. That mark, he explained, belongs to a secret organization that has monitored your lineage for decades. They are the ones who orchestrated Ethan's actions. He is a pawn in their game. If you do not act wisely, you will become their target permanently. The realization was suffocating. Everything, the stalking, the black notes, the sudden appearances of this stranger had been part of a much larger, orchestrated plan. Her mind raced, connecting fragmented memories from childhood with the patterns the stranger described. Her instincts screamed that she could not stay idle. She needed to act, to understand, and to prepare for the forces gathering around her. And yet, she could feel the danger closing in, a constant, lurking presence that threatened to engulf her at any moment. As the night deepened, the stranger placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. You must embrace the truth of who you are, Arya. Only then will you survive what's coming. I can guide you, protect you, but you need to awaken what's inside you. The choice is yours. Will you run, or will you stand? Arya's chest heaved as she processed the enormity of his words. The fear, the betrayal, the mysteries all converged into a single point of clarity. She could no longer be passive. She had been hunted, betrayed, and manipulated, but she was also being given a chance to reclaim her life, her lineage, and her power. Her hands shook as she closed the journal, determination hardening in her gaze. The stranger's eyes glimmered faintly in the dim light. Tomorrow, he said, you begin your training. And tomorrow, you will discover whether you can truly face what has been waiting for you all these years. As they exited the warehouse, a shadow detached itself from the corner of the building, silent, watching, waiting. And in that moment, Arya realized that even with the stranger's guidance, the deeper truths she had uncovered would not come without immense danger. The air in Crescent City felt electric, a prelude to the chaos that was about to erupt. Arya had spent the day following the stranger's instructions, preparing herself mentally for the hidden threats her bloodline had always invited. Yet, despite the anticipation and the growing awareness of her own latent powers, a knowing that lingered in the back of her mind. Could she truly trust anyone in this labyrinth of shadows? Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage of memories and whispered dangers. Every step outside carried the weight of scrutiny, as if unseen eyes tracked her movements. The neon lights of the streets reflected off the wet asphalt, painting everything in surreal, almost dreamlike hues, and Arya couldn't help but feel that the city itself was conspiring against her, or perhaps testing her. Her thoughts were interrupted when she arrived at the warehouse, a place that had become both a haven and a source of mounting tension. The stranger stood waiting, motionless, his gaunt coat brushing the ground as his eyes followed her every step. He had grown into more than just a protector. He had become a symbol of the mysteries surrounding her life. Yet, as comforting as his presence should have been, Arya's instincts screamed caution. Today was different. She could feel it. The atmosphere around the warehouse seemed charged with a malevolent energy she had never experienced before. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows, someone she never expected. Ethan, his expression was unreadable, his posture deceptively calm, yet the tension radiating from him was palpable. "You didn't think I'd let you discover everything, did you?" he said, voice smooth and dangerous. "All this time, you've been playing right into my hands." Arya's chest tightened, her mind scrambling to reconcile the betrayal. Ethan had been close, a friend, a confidant, someone she had trusted implicitly, and now he revealed himself as the orchestrator of her torment. Her hands instinctively reached for the journal, the only artifact that had guided her through the shadows, but Ethan's presence made her hesitate. He wasn't just a threat, he was part of the hidden organization, a puppet master who had manipulated events for reasons she couldn't yet grasp. "Why, Ethan?" she demanded, her voice trembling but strong. "Why betray me like this?" His smile was sharp, cruel, yet it carried an odd reverence, as if he acknowledged her strength. "Because you needed to understand," he said softly. "You needed to awaken. And sometimes the only way to forge power is through pain and deception. You are more than you realize, Arya, and tonight you will learn exactly what that means." The warehouse trembled with the intensity of the confrontation, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls as if responding to the conflict within. The stranger stepped forward, protective yet cautious, positioning himself between Arya and Ethan. "You've underestimated her," he said quietly, voice low but firm. "She's not a pawn, she's the key." Ethan's eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and irritation. Arya felt a surge of adrenaline, a new clarity piercing the fog of fear. She was not just a victim, nor was she merely the hunted. The latent power the stranger had hinted at was stirring within her, responding to the heightened danger, the betrayal, the desperate need to survive. Her pulse surged as a subtle warmth spread through her veins, a quiet but undeniable awakening. This was her moment to confront the lies, the manipulation, and the shadows that had followed her life for so long. As the confrontation escalated, Ethan lunged, and the stranger reacted instantly, blocking the attack. The room became a flurry of motion strikes, dodges, and sparks of energy flickering from Arya herself as she instinctively defended both herself and the stranger. The latent power she had ignored for years now flowed freely, illuminating the dark warehouse with flashes of radiant energy. Every movement was cinematic, almost surreal, the stakes higher than they had ever been. Ethan's smirk faltered as he realized her awakening was far stronger than he had anticipated. But just when it seemed the tide might turn in their favor, another presence emerged, a dark figure at the warehouse entrance, cloaked and impossibly still. The stranger stiffened, and Arya felt her newfound power falter under the weight of this new threat. A chilling realization hit her. The danger was far from over. Ethan had been a puppet, but the true player was still hidden, waiting to strike at the perfect moment. Breathless, adrenaline surging, Arya stared at the shadowed figure, sensing the culmination of everything she had feared and yet hoped to uncover. The stranger's hand gripped hers, anchoring her, a silent promise of protection and guidance. Ethan took a step back, eyes narrowing, the first crack in his confident demeanor. The air was thick with tension, electricity practically visible, and Arya understood with crystal clarity that nothing would ever be the same. This confrontation, this ultimate betrayal, was not just a challenge. It was the catalyst that would define who she was, who she would become, and whether she could finally wield the power her bloodline had promised. And as the shadow moved forward, the final test of her awakening began. The first rays of dawn filtered through the warehouse's broken windows, scattering across the floor like fragments of hope. The shadowed figure that had emerged in the previous night now stood fully revealed, a tall, imposing presence shrouded in dark robes, eyes glinting with unnatural light. Arya's heart raced, but it was no longer fueled solely by fear. It was tempered by clarity and determination. She had endured betrayal, survived stalking, and awakened powers she hadn't known existed. Her gaze met the stranger as the one who had guided and protected her from the very beginning, and in that instant, she felt a surge of unwavering resolve. The time for hesitation was over. This was the culmination of every secret, every danger, every choice. And she would no longer be a pawn. She was the key. The cloaked figure stepped forward, exuding an aura of control and menace. "So the girl of the lineage finally awakens," it said, voice deep, resonant, carrying authority that seemed to reverberate through the very walls. "Do you understand what you have become? Arya inhaled sharply, feeling her powers respond instinctively to the challenge. Flashes of energy lit her fingertips, a faint glow illuminating the warehouse like twin lanterns. The stranger at her side whispered, "Remember everything I've taught you. Trust yourself, trust your instincts. You are stronger than you know." Her eyes narrowed, her hands raised, and for the first time, she fully embraced the strength coursing through her veins. No longer frightened, no longer passive, she prepared to face the entity that had haunted her life from the shadows, fully aware that this confrontation would define her future. Ethan, recovering from the previous night's failure, hesitated at the periphery, uncertain of where his loyalty and his own survival lay. His expression betrayed both envy and awe, recognizing that Arya had surpassed him, awakened to a level of power and resolve he had not anticipated. The cloaked figure lunged first, a torrent of darkness that seemed to devour light itself. Arya moved instinctively, her power radiating outward, forming a protective barrier that shimmered like molten gold against the encroaching shadows. The warehouse erupted into a spectacle of energy flashes, echoes, and reverberations shaking the walls. Every strike she countered, every motion she made was precise, deliberate, born from instinct and training fused with the raw power of her bloodline. She realized then that she wasn't just fighting for survival, she was reclaiming her identity, her destiny, and the legacy her lineage demanded. The battle reached its zenith when Arya channeled the full force of her awakening. The energy in her hands coalesced into a brilliant sphere, glowing with warmth and power, and she hurled it toward the cloaked figure. Time seemed to slow as the sphere collided, erupting in a radiant explosion that illuminated every shadow, revealing the true face beneath the hood, an ancient member of the secret organization that had orchestrated decades of manipulation. Their expression twisted in shock and fury as Arya's power shattered the illusion, stripping away the darkness that had haunted her life. She stood, panting but unwavering, her hands still radiating light, as the figure collapsed into the debris. Silence fell, broken only by the faint echo of the city outside, indifferent yet witnessing her triumph. Ethan, pale and humbled, sank to the floor, a bitter acknowledgement that she had surpassed him, awakened fully to her potential. As dawn broke fully, Arya stepped outside the warehouse with the stranger by her side. The neon city, once oppressive, now seemed to sparkle with possibility, reflecting her newfound clarity. The danger, though never entirely gone, had been neutralized, and the threads of her past had been unraveled and laid bare. "You did it," the stranger said softly, eyes filled with a rare warmth. Arya's lips curved into a tired but victorious smile. "We did it," she corrected, feeling the truth of the words. Together, they had faced deception, betrayal, and shadows older than either of them, and emerged not just surviving, but triumphant. As the wind stirred around them, carrying the faint hum of the city waking, she realized something profound. Her life, once dictated by others' manipulations and secrets, was now hers to write. The shadows could never claim her again. And in that golden morning light, she finally felt free, at peace, and ready to embrace the journey ahead, hand in hand with the stranger who had guided her through the darkness.